Hey now, and how are you doing? Want to welcome you to the next episode of Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat. I met this next guest, Caroline, through a bunch of different connections, and I was like, this is a great story. I'd love to hear about some of the things that she enjoys talking about. And she has a little bit of a science background. I was like, well, I have that science background from working in intellectual property. I was like, let's connect and see how the magic gets made. How are you doing today, Caroline?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good.
So, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit to the audience, just who you are, and then we'll work from there.
All right. Yeah, I'm as you said, I'm Carolyn Crocker. I have a doctorate in immunopharmacology, and that means the study or the effect of drugs on allergies in my case. So I did work with a few drug companies. I've also written a few patent applications, and I gotta say, I would never want to do that again. Um,
I,
but
I
uh,
understand that well, as I've prepared a few patent applications.
but I am the daughter of two World War II survivors. They grew up in the Netherlands during the war, and they were children during the war. So that is what drew my attention to World War II.
Yeah, and probably from their experiences is how you grew up. With those the epigenetics, right? All the things that have happened in our families continue the patterns and growing up during World War II in the Netherlands. I can't imagine what how they lived. What are some of the stories that they shared with you?
Well, my father really didn't talk about his experiences during the war until he was in his 60s. And mom only told us the funny stories because mom's a little crazy. She's 91, she still is.
God bless.
And so she told us the crazy things she did, the funny stories. For example, one story she told me was about when she and her sister were bored and they said to their mother, in the middle of the war. Hey, we want to go out and play at the playground. And mom says, sure, go ahead. But if you see any bombers or you hear them, go and lie in a ditch. I don't know that I would have done that as a mother, but that's what she did. And so mom and her sister went to the playground. And sure enough, the bombers started flying overhead. And my mom said that they were playing on the teeter totter or the seesaw. And her sister was at the top and mom was at the bottom. She jumped off. Her sister hit the bottom and it hurt her bottom. And she was angry and she ran home. And then mom told me about how she went and laid in a ditch and she could hear the bombers dropping the bombs on a building that had documents that they didn't want the Nazis to get hold of. It was the Allies who were doing the bombing, and well, she said she could hear the people screaming, and so that left her with a lifelong fear of fire. But when I was a child, she only told me about dropping her sister and her sister being angry. So
Oh, yeah.
it changed as I got older.
Right. As we get older, we get to handle more of the stories that might have happened.
Right. And I mean, the epigenetics I think is fascinating because certainly both my parents have shown some PTSD as a result of their
Sure.
childhood experiences. But also, I was reading about how the children of hunger winter survivors have certain characteristics. And I'm one of five kids. One of them is anxiety, and all of us deal with anxiety. Another one is depression, and certainly more than one of us deals with that. And then diabetes, and four of the five have diabetes. I'm the only one who doesn't.
Wow.
So that has been interesting to me. Of course, that is just one family, and who knows if that's scientifically valid, but it is interesting.
No, it's very interesting. I mean, even how I guess your grandmother, uh, you know, go out and play in the middle of a war. I mean, what do you do with the kids? And and it was a different time, right? So if we use today's judgment on that time, it becomes oh my God, what was she thinking? Versus, how get out of my way, kids. I mean, I know I grew up in an era that my parents were happy when I went to go bike riding and cause whatever trouble. And as long as I had a quarter or two to make a phone call, they were happy if there was a problem, right? And
Right, right. And my grandmother was, she grew up without a mother herself.
mm,
And so she was very adventurous, and she walked from Germany to the Netherlands, immigrated by herself
can you
when she
imagine
was
that?
17.
Yeah.
And I'm just, yeah, I mean, she was not sheltered and she didn't shelter her kids. Or maybe she did shelter her kids compared to the way she was raised.
Right. And that's part of it is that's where that epigenetics comes in, is how we were taught. There's a lot of that stays with us. That's why Holocaust survivors and when they pass to their children, they don't intend on doing it. I know I've got past a lot of stuff that there was no intentions of
Mm.
what happens, but if you were protected or if you needed to hide from certain things, you kind of pass that on intentionally or unintentionally.
Yeah, I mean, one I thought was very interesting when I began speaking more with my mother as an adult instead of as a child. While I was growing up, she instilled in me a deep fear of men. And I just, I mean, I figured she was right. I mean, she's my mom, she would know. And I found that I was terrified. And it wasn't until my own boys became teenagers that I realized, you know what, men are people. Huh, they're not scary, they're just people. And then when I was going through her childhood with her, I suddenly realized where that came from. And it was because her father was involved in the resistance. And
Mm.
that meant that when planes were shot down over the North Sea, he would take in the pilots and then he would pass them down, the street to the next person to the next person until they would be put on a boat back to England. But he had three daughters. And so he taught the girls to be very cautious about these men who were living in their house. Yeah, that's reasonable, right? And then, not only that, a significant percentage of the Dutch population actually sided with the Nazis. And as my mother told me, these were people who spoke Dutch, they looked Dutch, but they would betray you. And so, again, the kids were instilled with this very healthy caution of anybody outside the family. Well, mom just, absorbed that with her growing up. And so she taught us. And it wasn't until I heard her stories that all of a sudden the penny dropped and I was like, oh, that's where that came from. And in me, that's unhealthy. But
Right.
in her, it was very sensible.
Right.
And yeah.
And that's the part about trauma. And I know, you talk about trauma. A lot of times we make the best decisions based on how we experienced it. That's how some of what trauma is. You and I might go through the same experience and feel differently, uh, but also be able to cope differently because of our backgrounds and that part of that learning that we had.
Mm, very true. Yeah. And some people, they just seem to be more able to cope and others are not. I mean, that was another thing I thought was fascinating with mom was she told me that her sister, who is just 2 years older than her, she's passed on now, thought she had a terrible childhood, just, awful. Mom said she had the best time of her life growing up during a war. Just very different people.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's how you feel it, and
Yeah.
that's definitely guides or creates those filters within our eyes and how we start living it. So what made you start looking at dealing with children and how trauma is passed on to children and down the epigenetic trails?
Yeah, just not just epigenetics, but actually the way they are taught by their parents. My husband and I took in teenagers when we were living in Iowa, and that made me very interested in why do some kids seem to cope and other kids don't. With being abused, other
Mhm.
some kids just seem to be so broken that you just can't there's nothing you can do to help them. And others, they do well with it. And then I began learning more about my parents growing up. When my dad passed, I wanted to distract mom from her grief because sometimes that's not a bad plan. And so I wrote down all the funny stories she told me when we were growing up, and I showed it to her. And I said, "Hey, mom, what do you think? Is that going to make a book?" And she said, "You left out most of it." And I said, "Well, you didn't tell me most." And then she began telling me the more difficult parts of her growing up. And so we worked on that together during COVID, and published Brave Face in, I think it was what it was it 22, I think it was, yeah, 2022. And then I thought, oh, I'd like to write about my dad, but I don't have any information because he was already gone. And then I began digging and found lots and lots of information, letters from his father and a book written by his mother, and, stuff that his brother had written, and just lots. And found, oh, I can actually write a very accurate book about him. And so Unforgivable came out in 24, I think it was. And so, yeah, so that has really intrigued me to know, okay, how did these people cope, and why did dad, when he had such unforgivable things done to him, how did he grow up to be a decent human being, and why? And just to investigate that, and I think I did find the answer, so that was fun.
Well, that's always good when you start. Did you feel any sort of level of healing for yourself after you found some of those hidden, or the hidden trails along the way? The reason why I asked that question is when I was doing some work on myself, I also went back into my family to figure out the patterns that in a lot of ways needed to be broken, and or looked at differently, and kind of given people grace who made some poor choices early on, and move where I can move forward for me. Did you find anything like that?
I think, yeah, to some degree, yes, because as I understood more of why my parents did what they did, I was able to deal with what they did. And that obviously helps if you actually understand why a person does what they do.
Sure.
That helps. And also, it helped me to realize, oh, these are perhaps not healthy behaviors. And again, they were behaviors that I learned because, because my parents, well, that was healthy for them.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah,
It was their coping mechanisms, and as you know, there's no guidebook to be a parent. We're
no,
all, for most of the time, even your grandmother's saying go play out, and when you see the bombs leave, that we're all doing the best we can with the resources we have, and the ways that we learned through our own experiences.
yeah, and it's been fascinating as well. For example, most people who read Unforgivable say, "What was wrong with his mother? Why did she act like that?" And so that's my current project,
Mm.
is figuring that out. Why would a woman be so unloving towards her kids? And I'm coming up with some really interesting answers. And it's just very interesting to delve into that stuff and figure out, why do people act like they do, and also to, yeah, give them grace and say, everybody has a story. We may not know what the story is, but it doesn't mean that it's not there.
Right.
And so, not to get hurt sometimes by the way somebody behaves, and to realize it's not all about me. In fact, very little is about me.
Yep.
You know,
That's a hard nugget for us
it,
all to learn,
it
that
is.
a lot of times when people react to things, it's not about us. We might feel it's about us, but it's not. Very little.
Just very little is about us, right? It's everybody, it's all about them. So, yeah.
So I know, I mean, you've had a full life, but you also, which I love talking about, is you're a big philanthropist. You worked with some not for profits. Um, what type of work did you do?
Well, I after I finished teaching, I started a nonprofit organization because I was very concerned about the way people who don't understand science on a deep level
Hmm.
can be scammed.
Sure.
And so I thought, okay, I'm going to look into some of these scams and I'm going to expose them and I'm going to let people know. So, for example, there was a pain clinic near where we lived, and so I looked up the person who was running the pain clinic, who said he was an MD, PhD, and discovered that he didn't have either degree.
Ooh.
It's when you start digging, it is astonishing what you can find out. And so I there was a drug that was being pushed, and I was like, this is not, this is just it's a sugar pill.
Mhm.
And again, I dug up and found out, and so yeah, so lots of that stuff. But what I found was very disappointing, and it's why I gave up after about 10 years or so, is that people don't care. They want to be scammed, mostly.
Right.
And so
They want to believe the easy answer, right? Yeah.
I was kind of shocked by that. I remember there was a man who asked me to look up oxygen therapy for people with traumatic brain injury, the hyperbaric
Mhm.
oxygen therapy. And I did lots of research. I wrote him a 40-page peer-reviewed referenced article on why no, it doesn't work for hyperbaric, or that is not going to work for brain injury. And it's pretty obvious that it's not going to, because we all know that if we breathe very, very deeply for any length of time, we hyperventilate and we can no longer breathe because our body says, nope, too much oxygen is bad. you
Yeah.
know, but this guy has made a lot of money on it, and so anyway, I sent this to this man who wanted to fund these poor veterans going through this therapy, and I said to him, "It's not going to work." And he said, "Well," he said, he said, "false hope is better than no hope."
Yeah. No, it's
And
not.
I thought, "Yep, there you and I differ." I just,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, no, false hope is not better than no hope.
Right.
Or, maybe there's different things we can do, but that's not one of them.
Right. 100%. Yeah. That. Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
so I decided, you know what, this is wasting my time. I'm not going to do it, because people don't want to know, mostly. Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's really they want to hear the stories that they want to hear, and will almost purposely fit whatever story they have into they already know where they want to go. They know the story where the end is, and make it fit.
yeah, and don't bother me with the facts,
Yeah.
and don't bother me um,
Critical
with
thinking.
yeah, with careful thinking. I want it positive or negative, nothing in between. Well, life's not like that. It really isn't.
Right.
And so that's it's to say, well, for example, vaccines. Oh, all vaccines are bad. No, they aren't. Oh, all vaccines are good. Well,
Right.
there's some question about whether all of them are necessary. I would think a lot of them are, but there are others where I'm like, I don't know.
Right. Follow the science. That's all
And right, and let's look at what the scientists say. Let's look at the peer-reviewed literature, and but I guess most people maybe can't do that. Maybe that would be too.
well,
I mean,
and
honestly, if somebody asked me to analyze poetry, I couldn't do it. So fair
yeah.
enough.
Yeah, no, right. I might not understand the science behind it. I mean, but a lot of that, is just looking at the facts, and where the research. So it goes back to, the
Yeah.
research, and to go back to your stories about the research that you're diving into your family, but you've also created, how many books do you have now?
I've written 15, but only two of them are about World War II.
Right.
And I'm working on a third that I hope will be out by December. And then I've been asked to write another one about my great uncle who spent time in Auschwitz, and so I'm excited about that one. And so that'll be the one after that. And
Well,
who knows how many there's going to be?
That's it. I started. I'm an author as well, and I've been writing for the past 20 years. And one of the books, that book actually is getting out sometime this year, as I'm going through the editing process. Because the voice that I had 20 years ago is not
Mm,
the voice I have now. It's a
yeah.
fiction, but you have other stories. Being
Mm,
a creative, and when you have a great background of having that creativity, you just have to find all the different ways. I mean, so the books that you write, the World War II books, those are not characters. Those are based on somebody, but they're not. I'm asking the question, I guess. They are the characters based on the real people, or are they a story of what, you know, a story of the story,
mm-mm.
where we've changed something?
They are true. They really did happen. Yeah. Brave Face is about my mother, and every incident that you read in there really did happen. I quizzed her about the personalities of her parents and her siblings, and those are as accurate as I could make them.
Okay. Yeah.
The only thing that is not, I guess you would say, strictly true is the conversations because, well, I don't know what I'm not
Well,
a
you
fly
weren't
on the
there.
wall. I can't go. I can't time travel, and I wanted to have people experience the books. So I wanted to make it feel like they're reading fiction,
Mm,
but it's not. So it's truth that reads like fiction. And
yep.
so when you read it, you think you're reading fiction, but you're not. It really did happen. And the same thing with Unforgivable. It really did happen. Every incident in there really did happen. Um, and the next book, it will be the same thing. And
Yeah.
that one has some really unbelievable stuff in it, but it really did happen.
Yeah. No, and that's I do some ghostwriting, and that's exactly what I did. I sat with somebody who had experienced. They didn't go to a concentration camp, but they were in Antwerp in Belgium during the war. She
Mm,
remembers as a young child, leaving on the last train, at a Dodge, and how her grandfather, got them to the different. And she goes, "I remember this lawyer," and then I researched the lawyer, or I researched some of the information, and you're like, how it all pieces together and becomes we're doing it in fiction. But she's like, I don't want anybody to know my family doesn't want to
mm,
hear about. So that's why I was asking to you about is it real, or we making up, like for my ghostwriting situation, we're making up names, but everything else happened for
mm.
really happening.
Yeah, yeah. I have not made up names because I'm writing about people who are dead
Right.
and they can't object. So I'm like, they're gone, doesn't matter. Except for my mother, who was more than happy to have a book written about her. So she is totally not bothered by that. But everybody else is gone, so they don't care. And yeah, and
Yeah.
I would be very hesitant about writing about people who are still alive, just simply because, and I mean, they say, and well, that's been my experience as well. Your own family doesn't read your books anyway, so you
Well,
might as well write about them because they'll never know. But
well, that's how we started it. She goes, my family doesn't want to hear my stories anymore.
they're not going to read them anyway.
So I said, okay, would you like to switch the book up a little bit? And then that way it's not your story. So this is a story I wrote. They might have a chance of reading it. She goes, that's a great idea. I go, great. All right. Whichever way you want to go, it's easy to go. And she loved the idea. And it
Yeah.
was funny. There was a few times that she didn't have all the facts, but it was like going through Ellis Island and things like that. So I
Mm,
said, so I researched, and she goes, no, no, that's not what happened. I go, well, I didn't know. I
mm,
haven't gone through Ellis Island. And then she was able to fill it in. I go,
yeah.
we're just making it up. She goes, no, no, but I can tell you what happened. And it's become one of I in a way I don't want the book to finish because I'm
Mm,
having such a great time, but it's also given me things that she says, yeah, you could talk about that, but not part of my book. And and that's where I'm like, oh, there's some great stories, not
mm,
knowing, things that happened during World War II, and how it really happened and the stories.
Yeah, yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, so I just went on a research trip, and for the book I'm writing now, and I met with the well, it's a distant relative anyway, and she just in passing told me about how her father was so angry with the person who betrayed them to the Nazis, and his wife and kids all died, and how he went to him afterwards and was going to take vengeance, but then he didn't. He just, told him what happened, and then the man committed suicide.
Oh,
Well, the thing that I thought was fascinating was I had suspected that that was the person who betrayed them, but I didn't actually have evidence of that. And then I asked someone to look him up, and she said, well, he was investigated, but he was not shown to be working for the Nazis. And I was like, okay, maybe that was not the person. And then this relative just comes out with his name. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I've just had this confirmed. Yes, that was the person who did it. And
wow.
so, that kind of stuff is just so interesting to, and then, well, she also gave me a packet of information. And in it, there was a letter from someone written in 1954 about my great great grandfather. And I just, really interesting stuff. So,
Right. That's, that's really where the diamonds are, right? In those
yeah.
little areas, you get one letter that might give you completely either align with that book or a different book along the way.
Yeah, I'm going to have to do a lot of editing because I thought the book was done, but no, it's not. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm going to have to do some changes. It's all right.
So this new book, and I don't want to go into detail this until I mean, love to talk to you about it afterwards. Um, so you have some family that had gone to Auschwitz, and the type of trauma that must have kind of put onto the family
Yeah.
at some point.
Yeah, I do. Yes. And in fact, it's actually talked about in, sorry, in Unforgivable. And that was the first time my father talked about his experience during the war. He told me that he was in a children's home in a place called Driebergen. And one day the soldiers came and they separated the kids between Jews and non-Jews. And for some reason, they did not take my dad and his brother. And he didn't know why, although I did figure out why eventually. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, I have a little. Don't worry about it.
All right. You might just have to block it all out. All right, start again. So, yeah, my dad told me about how they separated the Jews from the non-Jews, and they took the Jews, and his cousins were three of them: Miriam, Edith, and Hansha, who was only 18 months old, plus also his good friend Keitje, who ran out of the room and threw her arms around my dad and said, Fritz, Fritz, save me. And he said, I can't. And they tore her out of his
Hmm.
arms and they took her and put her on the train. And then all the kids, of course, died. And dad could not talk about that until he was in his 60s.
Yeah, I can't imagine survivor guilt and
And right. And after that, he talked about it every day till the day he died.
make sure that
Um,
story didn't just stay with him. And
no.
now you got that story out in the book for your dad.
Yes, I wanted to, that was one of the things I was pleased about is Keisha actually has no surviving relatives. They killed the entire family and all there was just nobody left of her family. Um, but people will remember her. Her photograph is in that book, and they'll remember her. And the cool thing is that Keisha actually taught my dad how to play the piano, and my dad taught me. And so
Hmm.
that has also been passed down, which is rather lovely.
Have you taught anybody the piano?
I have tried, but no.
Okay. All right. Yeah,
My
well, you
kids didn't want
tried.
to know. What do you do?
Well, that's it. Especially as a parent, I've learned. You could try to teach them, and either they want to learn or they don't, and either way
Right.
works out for them.
Right. But it's fine. I do have very musical grandkids, so that's fine. Yeah.
There you go. So
They
hey,
have they
it
have
didn't
better
miss.
teachers than me. Yeah.
Now, so I guess this I haven't read your book, of course, but so there's stories about the concentration camp. You lost some family, or your family knew a lot of people who had gone. How did that affect going forward? Again, part of that
Yeah.
epigenetics, part of it,
Right, right.
dealing with the
Yep.
trauma.
I mean, honestly, it wasn't. It was my father's brothers, or my father's, no, my father's uncle, whose family went. Those were the cousins who went to the camps.
Mm.
And I only just met that man was my dad's uncle was the only survivor in that family. But he did get remarried and then he had kids, and that was the person I met. And so she told me about the effects the war had on her father and on that family. And I'm still getting information about that, and that'll be in the
In
next
your
book.
future book, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, a future
But
book. Yeah.
so when you hear some of those things, how tough is it to write those emotionally difficult stories, or even the stories that aren't so as difficult, to make sure you have the right emotion in the story?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Unforgivable, where Dad was put in this children's home during the war, and afterwards his mother didn't want him with his brother. I had to take breaks from writing
Mhm.
because it was so painful to just live that story again, and to live it through, through the writing of it. It was very difficult. And then the next book that I'm working on now has also been incredibly difficult, and I've had to take breaks while I write it. And interestingly enough, I quite often will have my husband read what I write because he has to, unlike my siblings. So, but he also had to take breaks in listening to it or in reading it because it was so difficult.
Sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, you have to. I mean, I'm working with somebody who's giving me some stories, raw stories, and I'm like,
Mm,
whoa, this
yeah.
isn't
There.
going to go as quickly as possible because of that fact. One, you don't want to have that. You don't want the writer, the readers, you want to stay true to the story, but how do you
Mm,
unpack it and make it a little dense? A little less dense in that way, or heavy.
yeah, and that's been a challenge. I mean, and in Unforgivable, the thing I did was I interspersed the really heavy, difficult things with the typical child things that kids do. I mean, like my dad had a friend in the children's home where dad was being abused, but his friend's name was Trouble. And they got his nickname, obviously,
Yeah.
but they got into scrapes together. And they did the typical little boy things that little boys do. And so by putting those incidents in there, that, allows the reader to breathe.
Right. The mischievous where you're laughing and
Right.
yeah, yeah. That
Right. Yeah. And I mean, the same with my mom's story where, she, we're talking about the hunger winter where there is no food, and, that my mom is crawling through the cupboard in her parental place. There's no heat, there's no food, and she finds 4 grains of rice, and her mother cooks them with whatever, with a coal, one coal she had,
right.
and then they each ate 1 grain of rice, and that's a really hard story. But
Sure.
then the next story is about how mom was on the roof of that house because her mom was very permissive, and she and her sister were having spitting contests to see if they could hit the people walking below. And I mean, both are true.
Right.
Because kids do kid things even when they're suffering.
100%. Right.
So that's one way I've tried to make it less traumatic for the reader. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's what you have to do is remind them that these are kids going through these situations at the
Right.
time, and they cope the way that they can, being
Yeah.
mischievous and spitting and things like that are really just normal things to do when you have nothing else to do. It's not in
Just do.
today's world of take your iPhone, your phone, your iPad. What do they do? All the traditional games that they played or the ways that they focused.
Yeah. Yeah. Things that they did. Yeah. Yeah.
So I always we're gonna start rounding up the episode. But I always like to ask the question of stepping into the magic garden, and as an author, how do you balance? Let me explain the magic garden a little bit, so that way you give you the full thing. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I want you to step into the magic garden. But the magic garden is I want you've given us a lot of things to think about and some stories. I like to plant a seed, and it doesn't mean the seed's going to grow today. It might be something that the audience will hear and it'll grow fine, a little further. So, as an author, how do you gather the stories in your head? Do they come to you, or do a lot of them start out at lived experiences?
Because I write truth, I don't have to make up stories. The only thing I do have to do is imagine when that happened. Like, where were the people? How did they come into the room? What did they look like?
Mhm.
And so I have to do that. But as far as actually making up a story, I don't have to do that because these things really did happen. Um, and so that's just, I guess, easier and harder both because I do need to do an awful lot of research to find out what really did happen.
Right.
Uh, yeah.
Th- How much do you enjoy the research? I'm coming from, I guess, a science background
Yeah.
that, that's what I like to do as well. While I don't come from a science background, but I want to know all the lines, how it lines up to go.
Yeah, it's totally engrossing. I find it absolutely fascinating to do the research and to figure out what happened, and just to realize, oh, this is, yeah. I mean, well, for example, one thing, like I said, I just was on this research tour, and one of the things that I knew was that when the war started, my grandmother went out on the balcony to see why she was hearing, airplanes overhead, and then she could hear bombing. And her friend, she reported, said, "Oh, come back inside because you have to put on your house coat. You're in your pajamas." And my grandmother thought, "Well, who cares? I'm in my pajamas and war's starting." Well, my thought was right away, well, hang on, balconies are at the back of the house. At least the houses in the Netherlands that I'd seen, the balcony was at the back.
Hmm.
And I was like, why would she care if she's in her pajamas at the back of the house? And why would she look? And then, so I went to the place where it happened. And oh, the balcony was at the front of the house.
Oh,
And so, just little things like that, I find really fascinating to see. Oh, that's where she was in her pajamas. And,
well,
so,
I think that right. That's why traveling is so incredible to see, and especially when you're an author and to know the locations and to have that intimate relationship that way to to be able to pick up the the details in a way that you just can't imagine it out.
yeah, there's just so much more than you would expect. And so that's just very interesting. Uh, you know, yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much for your time. How can people find your books?
Everything is on my website, and it is called ramblingruminations.com. That name came from my son, who said, "Mom, you never stick to one topic." so, so it's RAMBLINGRUMINATIONS.com, and that's where all my books are.
All right, we'll make sure that that's in the notes. Thank you so much
Okay.
for, sharing some time with us, telling us about the books, and talking a little bit about how, the past is always going to be present when we are able to write it and, using our traumas, getting through
Yep.
our traumas.
And thank you for your time.
Right.
Bye bye.
And for everybody else, just always wish you peace and love in your life. And when you bring a bat, be authentic today and just always have an awesome day. Have a great day. There we go. Okay.
All right. Well, both of us had frogs in our throat. What do you do?
Yeah. Just not going to worry about it. It's one of those things. I'll try to, I'll spend this weekend to try to edit it a little bit and
Okay.
then we'll figure it out. Uh, Battling a cold. I had my daughter's graduation last week and came back with a cold.
Yeah,
So,
I did the same thing. I went to my nephew's wedding in Iowa and came back sicker than a dog. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I picked something up on the airplane. So whatever. But
okay. Well, hopefully you feel better. Have a great weekend.
I
I
do.
really thank you for your time, and I'll let you know. I'll send you when I record it. That's what I'm doing this weekend, mapping out some of the recordings, and
Okay.
then once of course, when I let it go, when I release the episode, I'll send it to you as well.
Great. Thank you very much. All
All right.
right.
Have a great day.
Okay. Bye bye.